Okay, let's go. Good morning. I'm Jenna Winters with the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Division of Parks and Watercraft. I am so happy to welcome you here to the second part of our wildflower series with some of our friends from Wildlife and DNAP. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. So first up, Catherine Connor. Introduce yourself and say hello to the folks, Catherine.
Hello, everyone, and good morning. Like Jenna mentioned, we are talking about our native plants today. I don't know if you guys were aware, or maybe you didn't get to join us last week. This is part 2 of a 2-part series, talk about and celebrating our Native Plant Month here in Ohio. In July of 2019, Governor DeWine went ahead and signed into legislation confirming that April, the entire month, would be designated to our native wildflower or native plants. And our native plants are so important. He designated it for the reason of really just to increase the awareness of the importance for them, not only within our wildlife, but for people as well. There's a lot of benefits economically, health-wise, just altogether. We are really fortunate that we have this month to celebrate. In fact, when he did that in 2019, we were the very first state to designate an entire month to this wonderful species. As Jenna mentioned, my name is Catherine Connor, and I am a naturalist here from Houston Woods State Park. I work for the Division of Parks and Watercraft, and as a naturalist, I get to do so many wonderful things. I always tell folks I get to be in everything. Here at Houston Woods, we do specialize in raptor rehabilitation and our birds of prey exhibits and educational animals. So I get to handle all sorts of wonderful things there. But through our programming and our outreach, we get in the creek, we get to get out on the hikes in the forests, we get to clean things up, we get to plant things, build, and through all of this, my 6 years here with the state, I have not one person through our division has let me down. Everybody is such a family here at ODNR, and I think this PowerPoint will really show that. The first person who is going to introduce themselves other than me is going to be a wonderful man that I've met through the Division of Natural Areas and Preserves.
Hello, my name is Eric Sagaser. I work for ODNR Division of Natural Areas and Preserves. I'm a preserve manager in the Southwest District. I've been with the division for about 6 years now. My main responsibilities are land management for this district, and a lot of my time spent at Houston Woods, Halls Creek, Caesar Creek, Culberson Woods, Clifton Gorge, and several other places. And while I'm there, most of what I do now is managing invasive species. So spend a lot of time controlling these as well. So if you have them on your own property, I understand the trials that come along with them, and hopefully some of what we talk about today will help you if you're interested in controlling them on your own property. And I believe with that, I will turn it over to someone else who has quite a bit of experience with invasive species, Justin.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Justin Law, and I am a state service forester, and I work for the Ohio Division of Forestry. There's 88 counties in Ohio, and there's 22 state foresters that can assist you if you're a woodland owner and you're interested in managing your woodlands to be healthy and productive. So if you're curious on learning more, I encourage you to contact your state service forester who can provide technical assistance, whether you're interested in wildlife management, timber management, or just looking to promote Ohio's native hardwoods. And with that, I would like to introduce Sarah.
Hi everybody, my name is Sarah Stankovic. I am with the Division of Wildlife. So I'm based here in the Columbus office, but I do work throughout the state. Most of what I do is actually focused on coordinating and carrying out the state's bat research. So you might recognize me from some of the bat webinars, but I'm also involved in some of our pollinator projects as well. And I'm excited to talk to you guys today about some natives backyard garden plants that you guys can put in.
Thank you, team. Well, let's get started. You've heard us all mention it. Native plants. So what does it mean to be native and what does it mean to be non-native then? So a native plant is going to be a plant that is here naturally. So it wasn't originally planted here by any human help whatsoever. Whereas a non-native species is going to be something that was introduced. So whether that was intentional or non-intentional, a non-native species is going to be something that was introduced by man and doesn't necessarily have a negative impact. So if it has a neutral or even a positive impact on the ecosystem, we still consider that a non-native species, even if it was, while it was introduced. If it was an introduced species that has a negative effect, that would be known as a non-native invasive species. So invasive species, you'll probably hear lots of folks talk about. An invasive species can be many, many things. So it can be plants, like we're going to talk about today. It can be animals, it can be fish, it can be crustaceans, it can be insects, and just a variety of things here on your screen for you to show you it really can be anything. And also, as this picture suggests, it's kind of an overload, right? That's what an invasive species does. It kind of takes over an area, and you're going to hear us talk a lot about a monoculture. And I won't steal too much thunder from our other presenters, but what that means is it basically takes over a space and leaves it very much inhabitable for other things. And then some of our other things like emerald ash borer, our insect that everybody likes to think of, is what really impacted our ash trees over the years. We've got some other things on here, and the one I really want to hit on here is in your left-hand side is a beautiful yellow flower. And if you are like me, it might have popped up in your backyard recently. I was actually going to do a video about this plant because I had no idea what it was. I was very excited. What could this beautiful wildflower be? Well, Preserve Manager Eric told me it's an invasive species. Get rid of it right away. And in fact, my husband got rid of it right away, too fast for me to actually do a video on. So that is Lesser celandine. That is a species that was brought over and planted primarily, I believe, because it was a beautiful flower. But with it, it kind of just spread. There's none of our native species really registered as a food source or really much of anything, so it just kind of gets to be left alone and spread. It's sometimes the problem with these invasive species is nothing around is aware, so they, one, might not know how to fight off that invasive species, like that ash borer, or it might not know what to do with it, so it just gets left alone and can take over. What you can do, though, is for you, our viewer, everybody's going to be different. So these invasive species, some you might run into, some you might not, depending on what type of area you have around your property. Some folks might just have a grassy backyard. Some folks might have a grassland where you might run into things like that Japanese stilt grass or autumn olive. Some of you folks might have wetlands where you might run into some aquatic invasives. We went ahead and threw together some quick videos for you guys about some of the #1 invasive species we deal with. And so to start off with, everybody's least favorite invasive, but you hear about it a lot. Why don't we take a look at some bush honeysuckle? Did we make sure to click the audio when we shared? Sorry about that, guys. Just a little bit of a technical difficulty, but we will get that right back up and running for you guys. And
part of the state. For wildlife. Hello, as a state service forester, it's part of my job to help landowners manage their woodlands. One of the biggest problems here in Southwest Ohio is invasive plant pressure. So let's look at what is an invasive plant and one of the #1 problems here in this part of the state. These bushes in the understory are a non-native invasive species known as bush honeysuckle. Bush honeysuckle was introduced in Ohio in the southern portion in the 1950s. It was planted heavily for conservation, erosion control, and the belief that it was good for wildlife. Unfortunately, bush honeysuckle was not good for wildlife, and it turned out to be a very big problem in our woodlands. While the berries from this plant are attractive, they provide not the great nutritional value for our native bird species. In addition, they greatly limit our native hardwood regeneration. Bush honeysuckle shades out and outcompetes our native woodland species. It can also form dense thickets like you see here, almost entirely void of vegetation. To identify this plant, we get a closer look. One of the easiest ways to tell if you have a honeysuckle bush is to snap the branch and look for a characteristic hollow pith. If the pith is not hollow, it is not bush honeysuckle. Also, late season in the fall, you can look for the characteristic red berries. The long arching branching is another characteristic. I'm here with my son William, and he's helping me to identify some plants. William, can you show me that branch from that shrub? Looks like a hollow pith to me. William, do you know what plant that is?
Bush honeysuckle.
Great job. Bush honeysuckle bark is grayish brown and when mature has broad ridges and grooves. Bush honeysuckle leaves are opposite in their arrangement, as you see here. Bush honeysuckle also has a very shallow root system. One easy way to identify bush honeysuckle is to remember that in early spring, it is one of the first plants to get its leaves. It is also one of the last to lose them in the fall. To control bush honeysuckle, like this large shrub, it requires both mechanical and chemical control. The branches and stems of these could be cut flush with the ground and treated with an herbicide. For additional information on control methods, please contact your state service forester. Another control method of honeysuckle is in early spring, small plants like this one can be pulled up by their roots. It's important to hang these branches up in another branch so they don't re-root. If you are a woodland owner and are interested in learning how to
increase the productivity of your woodlands, you should see if your woodlands has bush honeysuckle in the understory. Or if you were considering a timber harvest, it is very important to look and consider the invasive plants like this bush honeysuckle growing underneath this black walnut. If you were to cut this black walnut tree without mitigating or controlling the honeysuckle will fill in the gap, and you will lose good hardwood regeneration over time. Here in Southwest Ohio, bush honeysuckle dominates a majority of our hardwood forests. If you are a woodland owner, I encourage you to control your honeysuckle. If you're unsure on what to do, contact your state service forester for assistance.
So Justin has explained why honeysuckle is bad for other plants in a forested environment, but it's also not great for wildlife either. So these honeysuckle bushes don't have any berries on them right now, but you might know that they usually have really bright red berries. And you might think that those are really great for wildlife like birds. But in reality, the nutritional content of those berries is really low quality. So compared to our native species, which are really lipid rich, really great energy sources for birds, eating a honeysuckle berry is kind of compared to eating junk food. So it'd be like you eating a bag of potato chips. Like it'll fill you up and it'll taste really good, but it's just really not going to give you the nutritional content that you need.
My name is Michelle Comer, and I'm the Regional Preserve Manager here in the West District of Ohio. I'm in a wetland here, and I'd like to talk about one of our common wetland invasive species, looking at green canary grass. This is a really common invasive species in Ohio. It has this really wide leaf, about a half an inch, approximately half an inch or more. A couple other identifying features are has this ligule, which is right here where the collar kind of clasps. This little papery thing right here is a ligule right by the collar, where the leaf clasps onto the stem. But the growth nature of this species makes it pretty easy to identify. Typically, you don't find just small patches like you would find in these native grasses. They're typically larger patches. You can see back here, they tend to form monocultures, which is the real problem. They reproduce by seed as well as rhizomes. So the underground stems are means of reproduction, asexual reproduction, but they also do reproduce by seeds. They're pretty effective at both of those. So they were brought, green canary grass was brought here in the 1800s. It was, I think, primarily brought here used as a forage crop for cattle. And it has escaped and done very well in our natural areas. Number of ways to treat this species. You can, in small patches, you can pull it. You can also mow it down to prevent seed production. Repeatedly, typically in June, maybe in October, you can mow it if it's small enough patches. If it's a large area, we do some prescribed fire for green canary grass management. It has to be done in successional years, so typically 5 to 6 years in a row is a good number. It does a number of things. It knocks it back, but it also gets rid of the sap, which makes it, this is last year's growth, which is another way to identify it. It's really easy to identify by this last year's growth, as you can see. So burning it gets rid of that thatch. It also is one of the first grasses to come up. So once it starts to emerge, we will sometimes spray it with water, wetland approved herbicide, such as Glypro, Rodeo. So yeah, anytime You find these monocultures, reduces biodiversity in our natural areas, and it's a species that we target. So, you know, as you can see back here, Justin had mentioned bush honeysuckle. Bush honeysuckle is so successful, it does so well, it will even grow in wetlands. It's adapted to most areas, although this is right in the wetland. It's a little bit beyond, but it's it does very well wherever its seeds end up.
So reed canary grass can also impact wildlife as well. Michelle mentioned that reed canary grass can form a monoculture. A monoculture basically just means that it's one plant growing by itself in a large area. So essentially you've got a large area that's just covered by reed canary grass. And so if you want diversity in animals, you also need diversity in plants to attract different types of animals. So that's one negative effect of reed canary grass. The other is that it also sucks up a lot of water. It sequesters a lot of water in the system. And so if you've got a wet area where there's normally a lot of amphibians, if the reed canary grass takes over, it can kind of dry out that area and make the habitat less suitable for things like aquatic amphibians and fish.
In your backyards and other grassy areas, this is another invasive species that you might run into. This right behind me is poison hemlock. Now, poison hemlock was brought over because when it is larger, it grows a very beautiful white flower. I said larger, it's already pretty big, right? No, this starts out small and grows into about a 6 to 10 foot tall stocky flower. The flower actually really resembles Queen Anne's lace, which is a nickname for the real plant, which is wild carrot. And wild carrot, with that lacy flower, is in the same family as poison hemlock. So their flowers look very similar and their leaves look very similar. These leaves, nice compound little clusters here, are the same type of leaves that that carrot family has. Some things that set it apart from wild carrot is poison hemlock has down at its base this very pretty purplish splotches and different coloration down here. The other thing about this stem that you'll notice is it's not hairy. Wild carrot won't have the blotches, or it will have hair. The other thing that helps you figure it out is if you break it off, you'll notice it's actually hollow inside. And wild carrot would not be that way. Now, poison hemlock is, like I said, it's going to be everywhere. It can be in your backyard, it can be along roadways, it can be by the water in a dry area. And as the name suggests, poison hemlock, it is not good for humans, animals, anybody to ingest. So if you accidentally consume this, immediately go to the hospital. It is not good for you or your animals. So this plant, to get rid of it, what we have to do is a couple things. If it's very small, you can pull it, and there's some hearsay to if the actual juices and stems and just touching it can give you an irritation. OSU did a study and it was found that that was false, but if you're like me and want to be extra cautious, throw on some gloves when you're working with it. You can pull it if it's small enough. If it's in an area like this and it is early spring when not all of our other species are growing around it, we might spray some herbicide on it. And then the other thing is to just mow and mow and mow, kind of in successional years, to help get rid of this plant. There are some other species that you might run into in your backyard, but this is one that I am already seeing at my house. I'm seeing it at our nature center, and I immediately want to get rid of this. So guys, those are just a few of many different invasive species that you might run into here on your own property. What we're going to cover next, and what a lot of our folks are asking in our Q&A box, is how do you manage that property? So we covered a few examples of how you can get rid of these different species, but we always want to talk about a managed area versus an unmanaged area. And that can be seen, some of these photos on your right-hand side is actually going to be from our park here at Houston Woods. We are very fortunate to have the Houston Woods State Nature Preserve, which is a very heavily managed property. That acreage is managed by the Division of Wildlife, and we partner with them certainly for a lot of different removals. But kind of the benefit to that is, as you can see on the top row, in managed area, when you remove those invasive species, a lot of things can flourish from there. So one, just viewing wise, you can see so much better. I always point people to the big woods or the nature preserve to go for your hike because of that openness to the forest without that honeysuckle and autumn olive and things kind of breaking up your view. What it does is it just lets you open up to see wildlife better and just to have, I think, a little bit more of an enjoyable view. The other thing is it lets in a little bit for native vegetation to take hold. So some folks, once you've removed things from an area, you can see if things will naturally take hold and just continue to manage for those invasive species. So maybe you've cut out your main invasive species this year, next year go back to that area and just touch up things. Maybe you'll see little rootlets starting to come up, or sprouts, excuse me, rootlets, I don't even know if that's a word. Little sprouts coming up. Just kind of clean up what you already know as an invasive species and see what else grows there. So in our big woods, because of that removal of garlic mustard, honeysuckle when we see it, it allows for a beautiful view of spring wildflowers to come in. Those are not something that we planted there. Those are just naturally retaking that area. In kind of the opposite, if you leave an area unmanaged, it's just going to keep going. Honeysuckle especially, you can see in both of those bottom images, it is everywhere and it will take up an area, it will ruin your view, and it will ruin the possible great vegetation that you could have there. So we, on our properties, all of us, go ahead and try to manage to the best of our ability those non-native species or invasive species. So that way our visitors and our landowners, for our folks who go out to those properties, will have a little bit of better success. So if you do want to manage your property and you've taken out these invasive, you've done some work, what are you supposed to plant there instead? Why don't we talk about first, if you've removed some of these large trees and you have space to plant some native hardwoods, what should you plant? Nobody is better to talk about that than Justin.
Thanks, Catherine. And the good thing about living in Ohio is we have a very diverse forest ecosystem with almost 100 species of woody species documented that are native to the state. There's a variety of plants that we can manage for. Whether your focus is wildlife or timber management, there's something for you that can be native that was here before settlement that's supposed to be in our woodlands. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, what's a good tree to plant, as far as a landscape tree, or if you're looking to improve your woodlands for wildlife. And one of my favorite trees and one of the most productive hardwoods from a wildlife food source and also for long-term timber management is the white oak. As you see in this picture, the center picture here, white oak grows in well-drained soils. It pretty much can be found throughout Ohio. The acorns off the white oak is one of the most digestible and palatable food sources for our native wildlife. It's extremely important to our timber industry here in the state, not only in Ohio, but in other surrounding central hardwood states, Kentucky, Tennessee, Indiana. Another great Ohio hardwood considered plant is black walnut, arguably one of the most valuable trees in the eastern deciduous forest as far as the lumber products that it can produce. Not only that, but it provides beneficial food sources for squirrels, foxes, woodpeckers, and for human consumption also. What I encourage you to do if you're looking to plant trees on your property is to reach out to an expert, either State Service Forestry, the Natural Resource Conservation offices. All native plants have different planting requirements, but the main thing to drive home is just make sure you're prepared and plan, and look for a species that's gonna grow on the site that you're trying to plant it. So a little preparation ahead of time can help lead to success. If you're looking for smaller trees on the landscape, you might notice that a lot of people in the suburban urban areas are looking for small trees, a flowering tree that doesn't get very big. And it's a common problem across Ohio, where a lot of plantings are planted without consideration to how invasive or what the effects of these plants can have on our native ecosystem. For example, if you see in the left here, Canary pear, I'm sure if right now, if you live in Ohio, central, southwest, and you drive up and down I-70 or I-75, you can see this flowering white tree that unfortunately was planted, introduced in the 60s as a ornamental planting that has escaped into our woodlands, and it could be problematic. It's now an invasive plant in the state. So if you're looking for an alternative, a native flowering tree that doesn't get very big, on the right we have our eastern redbud. So I think my main point is there's something native here in Ohio that you can consider to plant, whether it's your own backyard, if you're looking to reforest an area that is grown right here in the state. And I encourage you to, like I said, there's many experts with the Division of ODNR that can assist you in providing more valuable information on what to choose as far as planting.
And that's the thing, we have got so many different things that we can plant. Once you've moved from your trees, let's take a look. Your mind initially goes to flowers, right? Next. No, you need grasses too. So grasses have a very important role in our ecosystem. So a lot of times grasses, one, are a food supply, because there are grasses that are great in the summertime, but there's also some that are good in the cooler seasons as well. So we are able to feed our birds and other wildlife that otherwise would maybe struggle a little bit in those harsh temperatures, whether it be cold or hot. Grasses also can become homes. A lot of those areas are perfect for our ground-dwelling species. So a lot of birds and other wildlife will build nests within grassy patches. And grasses can also just kind of fill things up. So whether you are looking for something tall or short, depending on where you're thinking of planting, there is a number of grass species out there. I do recommend they kind of add, like I mentioned, maybe just a fuller, kind of fills things up and helps not only plants, but also our wildlife. An area that I know we have definitely added some grasses like purple top in here. We've got the little blue stem is a really popular one, but these are actually plants that we planted in a large scale prairie that we did here within the park. And if you'd like to, on your property, want to kind of gear things more towards an open prairie-like setting, we've got a few tips from Eric.
Hi, everyone. So I just wanted to share with you some thoughts on, there's a couple pictures up here of species, and actually some of these are in my own plantings at home. Now, generally on nature preserves, we are typically not doing restorations and plantings. We're generally managing the invasive species and allowing the area to recover if possible. And but we do strongly encourage using native landscaping to prevent further invasive issues. And so there's a couple small areas where we've done kind of renaturalizing areas, taking them out of lawn, etc., to promote this kind of native landscaping use. And I've done some of this at my own home. So if any of you have been to the state fair when we hand out the seed packets, a lot of the plants that are in there they're pretty easy to grow, easy to manage. They do well in a variety of conditions. So on some of the pictures here, we got gray-headed coneflower in the top left, purple coneflower under that, and brown-eyed Susans. These are some of the things that come in our packet. They do really well. They're pretty hardy, kind of easy to keep around. One thing that I would stress is very important is your site preparation for these. It can really go a long way ensuring that you have a weed-free and sod-free place to sow these. So there'd be a number of options there, whether that's covering with tarps or something of that nature to shade out the area for an extended period of time. Or if you were, another option is to potentially use chemicals to make sure that it's a weed-free area. And then once you start to have plants come up and you are cultivating an area, another thing that would be important to keep in mind, if you're doing mechanical cultivation, like hoeing, for instance, I had my mentor in the division when we were renaturalizing an area, he'd always be reminding me not to cultivate too deeply, because whenever you're doing that, you're bringing weed seed up from the seed bank and exposing it to sunlight, and you're going to potentially encourage germination there. So just something to keep in mind. And I also wanted to throw out there too in this segment that if you go to the ODNR homepage and then navigate down and click on the icon for DNAP, it will bring up DNAP's Division of Natural Areas and Preserves main page. And at the very bottom of the left-hand sidebar, there's a link for documents. And if you click on documents, this will bring up native plant lists. And there are lists there compiled that will make recommendations depending on your site. That's another thing that's very important here. I threw out several of these examples. A lot of these like a pretty full sun area, but we have lists put together for recommendations depending on whether you're wanting to do a planting in a forest, if you're wanting to do this open field, a wetter area. So, and then there's also a lot of other great resources like Justin mentioned from extension agencies and soil and water conservation districts to help you with this as well.
Thank you, Eric. I really appreciate the hard work that you guys do, and I'm so excited for the prairie that we have here at Houston Woods, that it is flourishing so well. Now, that being said, we've got this beautiful large prairie here at the park, but when I go home, I just have a little yard. But if you're out there and you're in the same boat, there are still plenty of options out there for you to do just in your little backyard or even in some potted plants. So to talk a little bit further on maybe some actions that you can take to help both your native plants and native wildlife, we have Sarah.
Thanks, Catherine. So yeah, when you're planting your backyard garden, if one of your goals is to attract wildlife, so take a moment to think back to the last webinar if you were in that. We talked about something called pollination syndrome. So plants with different shapes, scents, colors, etc. can be more likely to attract certain pollinators. So if you're looking to attract hummingbirds, then you should consider plants with red tubular flowers, whereas if you want more bees that are going to help pollinate your veggie garden, then you should plant things like sweet-smelling, broad-petaled flowers. So if you missed that webinar, missed us talking about pollination syndromes, I believe it is posted on the OhioDNR YouTube channel, or will be. But if you don't have a specific goal in mind, planting a variety of native plants is just fine. So in fact, a variety of plants means that you're going to get a variety of insects, and then you're more likely to attract different types of wildlife that feed on those insects. So you're going to get birds, bats, etc. So in my intro, I said I was going to talk about some specific native plants. I guess that was kind of me misspeaking a little bit. We could spend probably several webinars just covering specific native plants you can use, talking about garden design, but ultimately, as you're probably seeing these questions roll into the Q&A, you can see everybody's situation is different. Different regions in Ohio are going to be dealing with different invasives. Your backyard could be shaded, it could be sunny. Everybody's got their own situation. So instead of talking about specific plants, I just wanted to share a resource with you so that you can find something that might work for you. So Eric just talked about that great DNAP resource, and we touched on this website last week, but please go to OhioNativePlantMonth.org. There's a lot of great information on there, so you can download this PDF that has information on over 200 of Ohio's native plants. So to find that, you go to the website. In the upper right-hand corner, there's a tab that says information. So if you click on that, it's going to bring a drop-down menu, and then you can click List of Native Plants, and that'll bring up a link for you to download this PDF. So not only does the PDF include the scientific names, the common names of the species, it's also going to tell you what season the flower is blooming, what habitat and growing conditions that plant likes. It'll tell you the color of the flower, and it's also going to tell you what pollinates that flower as well. So it's a phenomenal resource if you're looking to boost the number of native plants on your property. So I really recommend checking that out in addition to the DNAP resource as well. So for the rest of my time, rather than focusing on the specific plants that you should plant, I just want to touch on a few other things that can help make your backyard garden more attractive to wildlife. So the first one is that providing a water source or several different types of water sources is important. So for most of you probably know a bird bath is a common feature for gardens, and that's really great. Just make sure that you only put about 1 to 3 inches of water in your bird bath and that you're cleaning it regularly. And then for butterflies and other insects, you can install something that's called a puddling station. So you might have seen butterflies aggregating in large numbers around small puddles like this photo on the left. Since butterflies are getting water from the nectar that they drink, they aren't visiting these puddles for water, but what they're doing is that they're ingesting minerals that have actually dissolved in that water that they're otherwise not getting from nectar. So nectar is just sugar water, there's not any of those other minerals in there that they need. So to replicate this in your yard, you can either create a shallow depression in the soil and just keep that moist for them, or you can create a puddling station, which is what's shown in the lower right-hand corner. So you can put some rocks, some sand, some dirt into a shallow dish with a small amount of water, and then that should attract butterflies and other insects. Just another interesting note, you might see that butterflies in the wild are sitting on like dung or carrion. They're doing it for the same purpose. They're getting those minerals. But that's probably not going to be a really nice feature in your garden, so I'd recommend just sticking with the puddling station and not throwing out some carrion. So the second thing is that it's also important to provide shelter for pollinators and other wildlife. So obviously, again, this is going to vary depending on the species, depending on your region. So some important things, consider leaving a patch of bare ground in your yard so that ground nesting bees can use that, or you can also add pieces of dead wood to attract some of those cavity nesting species instead. Certain species of butterflies are only going to lay their eggs on specific plants. Those are called host plants. So you want to make sure that you have a few different host plants for different butterflies in your garden if you want to attract a variety of different types of butterflies. And then of course you can add bird boxes and bat boxes as well to try to bring some of those species in. One important thing that people don't always consider is to leave your leaf litter or other dead plant material at least until the spring. So in the fall, a lot of people like to go in and clear out all the dead plants and things like that. But a lot of insects use this material for shelter, or they sometimes overwinter in those hollow stems of your dead plants. So if you can leave those until the insects hatch out in the spring, that can be very beneficial for them. And so finally, I'm just going to touch on pesticides. So pesticides include herbicides and insecticides. These can impact non-target species if they're not used correctly. So you might harm pollinators if they're consuming contaminated pollen or nectar. And other wildlife might be impacted if they consume or come into contact with the leaves, the soil, or any other material that might have those pesticides on them. So obviously, when we just talked about controlling invasive species, we are mentioning herbicides, using herbicides to keep them under control. So sometimes pesticides are necessary to get a problem to a place where you can deal with it in other ways. But when they're necessary, it's best to use the least toxic material that you can. Always use it according to the directions on the package. And if you can, treat plants at a time of day or a season when their flowers aren't in bloom. And if you do have a smaller scale problem, it's best to try to tackle it with other methods first before you turn to pesticides. And finally, if you thought you were going to get out of my section here without me talking about bats, I'm sorry to say you are wrong. So I get a lot of calls from people that ask me what they can do to attract bats to their property. So if you have a larger property, we do have a resource available. We have a guide called Managing Habitat for Bats, and you can download that for free on the Ohio Bat Working Group website. But if you've got a smaller area, you can actually attract bats to your property using a native plant garden. So remember, bats in this area, they're not nectivorous, they're not frugivorous, they are insectivorous, so they're eating insects. So what you want to do is plant things that are going to attract the night-flying insects that bats eat. So that's going to be things like moths and beetles. So I've got some photos here. These gardens, they sometimes are called moon gardens, which I think is kind of cool. They're typically made up of white or pale flowers that are going to bloom late in the day or at night, or they're at least going to give off a scent at night. So those are going to attract the insects that the bats are going to eat. So I wanted to include this example just to show you that you can get creative with your native plant garden and illustrate that sometimes what you're doing is you're using the flowers to bring in the bugs that are then going to bring in the other wildlife species. So sometimes people are resistant to native plant gardens because they don't want to attract a lot more insects, but insects are food for a lot of things. And so that's the goal, is to get the bugs in and then you'll get the rest of the wildlife.
Thank you, Sarah. We have got so many questions in our Q&A box, but before we get there, I think some of these resources we have here can help you guys as well. So what we've got compiled for you is each of our divisions do a little bit of different things, but we all have wonderful things for you guys. So to start off with, let's look at what the Division of Forestry offers.
Thanks, Catherine. So if you have a larger woodland or your forest land that you're managing and you have specific questions on technical assistance, what to plant, how do I treat my invasive species, a good resource is to contact one of your state foresters in your region. And you can find that on the Division of Forestry website, Landowner Assistance. There's also private consulting foresters that can be searched for by what you're looking for, whether you're needing a management plan for your woodlands. Ohio Society of American Foresters, you can do a search. Also, the Association of Consulting Foresters. One thing we get a lot of questions on is yard tree management, tree risk assessment around houses. Foresters are not arborists, so if you're looking for how to properly prune your tree, recommendations on your tree around structures, tree health for your yard tree, I encourage you to go to treesaregood.org and look for a professional arborist. They have a lot of good information, and that is a good website you can search by area code and region across the world. Another good for other publications on how to treat certain invasives of woodland management, Ohio State Extension, Ohio Woodland Stewards link has awesome webinars, informational videos, and publications that can help you find fact sheets and informations on specific things regarding your woodlands and how to best manage those. Also, locally, your soil and water conservation district offices, every county's got great resources on the local level, along with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, and some counties in Ohio have farm bill biologists that can help you if you're looking for more prairie restoration, grasslands, native wildflowers. All those farm bill biologists are an excellent resource for you here in Ohio.
Thank you, Justin. And how about the Division of Natural Areas and Preserves? I know they've got some new stuff as well to cover.
Thanks, Catherine. Yep, we've got, I think that was new this year, was the Native Spring Wildflower Checklist, which that's been pretty popular so far, I understand. It's kind of fun, similar to a birding list. Might increase your enjoyment on hikes if you want to take a copy with you and kind of tick off the boxes there as you go. It's really fun recreational opportunity that people are starting to take advantage of. We also have a spring wildflower report that's published weekly on our website, and that will tip you off to kind of where we are in the bloom season for a variety of species regionally for the state. And then, as I mentioned earlier, under our documents section, we also have recommendations for landscape or native plantings as well.
Thank you, Eric. And how about our Division of Wildlife?
Yeah, so the division has a few guides that, am I muted? Nope, sorry, I thought I was muted there. Sorry, the division has a few guides that I wanted to spotlight that might help you with your backyard garden. So the first one that we're showing here is titled Backyards for Butterflies. So inside you'll find suggestions for a handful of plants that will bloom in each season. So that's important, is having something that's blooming in spring, summer, and fall. It also includes a selection of nectar plants and then more detailed information about a few different butterflies and their host plants. We also have two other field guides, one for moths and one for butterflies specifically, and that also contains information about host plants for various species as well as other information that might be useful to you. So you can download those guides as well as numerous others by going to wildohio.gov and then searching for field guides. So that'll bring up the list. I think we have like 25 guides on that page you can download. And additionally, the Division of Wildlife employs private lands biologists. So those are similar to the service foresters that Justin mentioned. So the private land biologists can offer you personalized information on managing your land. So stream corridors, pastures, prairies, woodlands, urban landscapes, they can help you manage those properties. So the division is divided into 5 different districts, and you can see those districts in that map on the left there. And each one of those districts has a private lands biologist. So you can find your district's private lands biologist by searching for private lands biologist on our website, or you can just call 1-800-WILDLIFE or email this wild info email address here and just request their contact information, and they'll be happy to provide you with that. So I am also happy to help you in any way that I can, so I've provided my email address here as well.
Thank you, Sarah. And how about the Division of Parks and Watercraft? We have wonderful resources. Well, we have our website listed here, but one thing that I really stress for you guys is to take advantage of all of these resources, whether that's the field guide, the checklist, and come out to your parks. Ohio is one of the few states left that has our state parks free for you guys to come and enjoy. And we have 76 different state parks for you guys to get to come out and recreate at. And though we're not doing programs at this time, typically our programs consist of varieties of different things depending on what park you're visiting. But here at Houston Woods, we do everything from litter pickups to plantings to clearings to bird program, all sorts of wildlife programs, just getting you guys in touch with nature and getting to appreciate it in maybe a little bit of a different light than normal. For you guys, if you have any questions whatsoever about our resources, about something that's happening on your property or some wildlife that you've run into, you can also go ahead and just reach out to us through email. I have also provided my email there for you guys, and I'm happy to help answer anything. But in closing, before we get to questions, I just want to thank you guys all, everybody from ODNR here. We thank you. We are all very passionate about what we do. That is why we are in the position and here talking with you guys today. but we wouldn't be here if you guys weren't passionate as well. So we really appreciate you taking some time to learn with us over these past couple weeks. And it doesn't end here. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Specifically, I want to shout out to YouTube right now. Go to OhioDNR on YouTube, and that is going to take you to things just like this. We record all of our different webinars, videos, and it can be things from just a few minutes to an hour-long presentation like this. So please check that out. And again, we just thank you so much for appreciating and helping celebrate our native plants this month. Let's hit all of these wonderful questions. I think the perfect one to start out with here is going to be for Sarah. Sarah, are there any apps that specifically you think would be great for helping ID some of these maybe native or non-native plants?
Yeah, that is a great question because we actually talked about a couple apps in part 1 last week. So if you weren't able to join that, go ahead and head to the YouTube video or the YouTube page that Catherine just mentioned. I specifically talked last week about iNaturalist. That's a very popular app. It has a feature where you take a photo and then there's a little button you can press that says, "What did I see?" And it will bring up its best guess of at least the family of the plant that you're in. And you can publish that photo for other people to provide you with IDs as well. And then the other two I talked about were called Leaf Snap and Google Lens. So I'd recommend checking out at least those three or at least watching the video from last week to see some demonstrations of those. If you go to your app store, there's probably tons of them in there that you can try out. They'll do native and invasive species, but I would recommend at least starting with those three.
And Sarah, there is a couple more questions here actually. So the first one was, so they live in the city and mosquitoes will not leave them alone. Is there any control method for this? So I know some folks out there might use some spray, whether that is one of the stronger sprays or maybe some natural one, but what is your favorite mosquito remover?
Yeah, I can sympathize. I am a mosquito magnet. So trying to connect it to native plants first, I was looking up some things. There are some plants and like essential oils made from certain types of, citronellas, lavenders. The problem is you can't just plant those in your yard and have them repel mosquitoes. You actually have to crush parts of the stems and the flowers to get that oil out. So simply planting a bunch of these mosquito repelling plants isn't going to do anything. The biggest thing for mosquito control is making sure you don't have any standing water. So if you do have a water source like a bird bath in your yard, then make sure you just dump that out every couple days so that the mosquito larvae can't grow in there. And then finally, you can put up some bird boxes, some bat boxes, and help try to attract that wildlife that's going to eat those mosquitoes and other insects.
And final question, Sarah, if you do put up a bat box, does it need to be a certain height?
Yeah, that was a perfect segue.
Yeah,
it does. So there are a lot of requirements. Bats are super picky. And so there are some great guides. There's one, Bat Conservation International has a bat box builder's handbook. I believe it's online for free. If not, feel free to email me and I can send you a copy. Bat boxes need to be, the bottom of the box should be at least 8 feet off the ground. If you can get it 10 to 12 or even 15 feet, that's preferable. And you also need to make sure it's in a sunny location. So in a south facing or east facing area.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for all of your help. This is a great time for me to promote that we just put up 12 new bat houses here at Houston Woods. So we have got hopefully some great activity coming our way when there's not snow on the ground. But next questions I think will be perfect for Eric, and I apologize, there's going to be a handful here, but you and I talked about many of these, so let's just start knocking them out here. Eric,
okay.
Is it okay to not have trees? Can you just have plants? Is that good enough?
I mean, so this depends on, well, I can hear Justin right now saying, no, I'm just kidding. No, it is. We had native prairie in Ohio and savanna. So sparsely treed areas that were grasslands. And also we have wetlands that, are areas that most of the time woody species have a difficult time getting a foothold in. So it's kind of all of us, we sort of have different little niches here, right? And so there's obviously a lot of overlap, but Justin and I are both in forests often. But yeah, it's definitely fine. It just depends on the situation you're in, the environment you have, what your conditions are like. Absolutely.
So our next one is from Miranda, and she asked for a good resource, which I think we've given plenty of resources, but maybe let's just give her some tips real quick, guys. So she is coming from an area with a creek bed and hoping to restore that area. What might be some good things to help with erosion control, invasive grass removal, encouraging wildlife back there? Is there anything you guys would like to throw out to that?
So one thing that I might recommend, if you have questions regarding streams and riparian areas, is the Scenic Rivers program. The managers there, they're very good at managing the aquatic resources. I am mostly terrestrial when it comes to the land management side of things, but there is, again, significant overlap with some of the problem species. So we'll see many of the same ones, and the treatments are they're going to be the same, really. So one resource I'd also throw out there for invasive species, there is a section on DNR's website that's being filled out right now. I don't think it's quite complete yet, but also the Ohio Invasive Plant Council has fact sheets on many of our common invasive species that will also give treatment recommendations as well. And again, there's also widely available literature from various universities, extension agencies, soil and water conservation districts, where they'll really spell out a course of treatment and general recommendations and replacement, etc.
So we did have someone ask, and it kind of goes along with this as well, is there a best chemical to treat around streams or other waterways?
So yeah, you have to be very careful, so when it comes to applying herbicide, the first thing that I want to throw out there is that you need to look at the label. You have to read the label and follow it. The label is the law on the herbicide bottle. It is federal law. So you need to pay close attention to the application methods, the areas that it's acceptable to treat with, and the application methods. Sometimes there's, they'll spell out procedures in there, and also potentially concentrations for various species. But there's a variety of chemicals that are approved for aquatic use. If you if you have somebody that is coming to your property to manage these, they need to be a licensed commercial applicator, which again, there's resources out there, and Justin's probably better to put you in touch with those folks than I am. But there are folks that will do contract invasive species work. If you're doing it yourself, that's fine. Like I said, just make sure you're paying close attention to the product label. There's various aquatic glyphosates and triclopirs.
All right, and one other one was specific plant related. Is there a best way to get rid of winter creeper? And I guess this would be a good time also to cover what is winter creeper for our visitors who might not be aware.
So this is escaped. Well, it has escaped. It's a cover plant, really. You've all probably seen it. It's tends to be low growing, but what it fruits is it actually needs to climb a tree to go ahead and flower and fruit. It's sort of tough to say. It kind of depends on your situation. If it's a small enough infestation, if the plants are relatively small, it's possible you might be able to control it mechanically by pulling, what have you. But with most of our woody species, in general, you could do what's called a cut stump treatment. And again, it's going to depend entirely on the product you'd select. If you're going the chemical routes, you need to pay close attention to that. But a lot of times what you can do with pretty much all of our woody species, if you cut the shrub or what have you to where there's about 6 inches or so or less left, and you treat the layer, the cambium layer that's just inside of the bark, that's the living layer, living tissue of the plant. There's a lot of different herbicide options where you can do what's called a cut stump treatment that minimizes the use of herbicide, and it's a little more controlled. You could also foliar spray for winter creeper. It's a little bit tough to kill that. It's kind of a waxy, hard leaf to penetrate there. But there is foliar spray options there as well. Like I said, it's kind of nice if you can avoid that to begin with, if you can go the mechanical control route. But I realize that, in large infestations, that's not always possible.
Eric, you can probably appreciate this question. Very similar. It just says, help, thistle. I understand that issue as well as you guys. Eric, any pointers for that? I know it is a constant battle.
It sure is. Yes, it absolutely. A lot of these species are very frustrating. I just stress that a lot of times there's no easy answer, and really it's persistence is the key. And trust me, we have the same struggles. They're invasive species for a reason. They're happy about anywhere, and they're hard to get rid of. With thistle, there is a window where you kind of with glyphosate products, I believe you're going to want to hit it in the fall when it's actually sending nutrients back down into the rhizome. And now I think you probably want to try to, I have to check myself on this on the literature. I think you're going to want to try to get it before it goes to seed there, but when it's starting to send nutrients back down into the rhizome is when you want to get it. So when it first emerges, it may not be the best time to get it, because if you just top kill the plant, the rhizome, it's like a very dense, very tuberous network of roots is what I'm talking about. And they store lots and lots of energy. If you just top kill the plant, it can regenerate from that rhizome, which is also a reason why mechanical control is really not a great option for it, because unless you get all of that rhizome, which can be huge, by the way, it can regenerate from a little piece of that. So timing's critical there. And again, you need to reference your selected herbicide product. And this is another place where I'd encourage you to check in with your soil and water conservation district or an extension agency, where they'll have fact sheets that spell out for you what type of product, whether that's a triclopyr or a glyphosate, and the specific time period you want to address this with.
All right, Eric, 3 more for you before we go to Justin, but you're in luck. I'm going to mix 2 together. So this is combining a question from Kelly and one of our anonymous questions, but it is in relationship to buckthorn. So first things first, how do we ID it, and how do we ID some of the different types? But then once you've removed something like buckthorn, what can you replace it with? As well as what can you replace autumn olive with, honeysuckle, etc.? What would be a good replacement there?
So this is one where I would encourage you to go ahead and check out the Ohio Invasive Plant Council fact sheet, where they'll have they've got a document that'll help you identify the buckthorns. So there is actually native buckthorns in Ohio. The one that I see in this area is Carolina. It's generally alternate, and it's kind of a little more lance-shaped than the other buckthorns and glossy and common. Those are generally opposite, and the stems are heavily lenticelled. It's kind of like little dots all on the stem. If you're familiar with our native spice bush, it's kind of the same thing. And it's just a little, it's like a little port for it to exchange gases, but it looks like little dots all over the stem. And often with the buckthorns, like the growth habit that I see in the settings where I see them, which would be in fens around here, it's almost like they shoot up and they're just a little stick, this little stick of a plant. They come up at this dense wall. So in the, actually, I got the OIPC brochure here to give you their website. I believe it is, yes, it's oipc.info. And if you download their sheet, that'll give you a little bit better of an idea of what the leaves look like. And then, you know, if you'd refer to some other botanical texts that can maybe help work through differentiating the species. I know with our native, it's generally, it's like 8 to 10 pairs of veins in the leaves. Versus like 3 to 4 on the common.
Gotcha. Well, Eric, I really appreciate you stepping in here. Let me ask just one more question here, and it's an interesting idea. It was asked earlier in the webinar, but is there a plant that once you've removed invasives, can you plant? Is there a plant that you can plant that will kind of help keep away invasives?
So yeah, there's you know, and this again, this comes back to, it's sort of why I'm a little reluctant to just throw out one single plant, because it's really going to be situational again. And I think, you know, Justin and Sarah alluded to this as well, that it's going to depend so much on your environmental conditions where you're replacing this. But again, we have those lists on DNAP's website that'll really help you narrow it down, and that includes trees, shrubs, and forbs for the kind of the setting that you're in. So if that's a wet setting, we have one page for all those. If it's you know, open field, forest, we've got one for all those, and that'll give you a variety of options. You know, you might consider trying out a native that's a little more aggressive, kind of a go-getter, you know. You know, like things like bergamot and mints come to mind. You know, they're kind of aggressive and fill themselves in well. But if you establish try to restore just native plants in general, it's not going to entirely keep the invasives out. Obviously, they work their way in the first time, but it can help slow them down. It's a placeholder, right? It's at least giving them some kind of competition. So whatever you decide to go with, if you start just regenerating a healthy ecosystem there, it's going to help. But unfortunately, the invasives, it's going to be an ongoing maintenance issue.
And I completely lied, Eric, because this question is specific for preserves. And I remember reading this earlier, and it is a great one. So we all know, and hopefully when you arrive, we also have signs that stay. So you can't take anything out of a preserve, but they did ask, and it sounds like they are, you know, concerned hikers. If they are out there in the woods and they see something like garlic mustard or lesser celandine, you know, should they do something about it?
So I appreciate the sentiment so much, and what I would encourage you to do, we will take help, absolutely, but what I would encourage you to do is to look up what region the preserve that you're in falls under on DNAP's website, and get in touch with the regional manager or the preserve manager and get signed up as a volunteer. And that way, when you do that, you know, there might be a specific area of high concern that we have that we're really trying to manage hard to help a species that's struggling, what have you. Maybe our time is, you know, best spent in this area over here, etc. That way that, you know, whoever is the manager on site, they know where effort's being put. So maybe you've got an area cleared out now, and we can focus attention somewhere else. So I would just, yeah, we'll absolutely take the volunteer help. I would just encourage you to go and work with the preserve manager wherever you're at and get signed up as a volunteer.
Thank you. And really quickly, we want to answer just these last few questions because we are definitely way past time, but we did start late. So last ones here are for Justin, and it's just two here. Justin, after removing honeysuckle like you spoke of, is the soil healthy enough for wildflowers and herbs? And this two-parter, can you use that honeysuckle to make mulch?
Well, research has shown that the honeysuckle does rob nutrients. So if it's an established stand that has been there for some time, it will take some time to naturally restore the soil health. So it's not something that'll happen overnight, but you will, after control and in controlling of large stands, I recommend the use of some sort of herbicide. You will start seeing more of your native plants, such as herbaceous community, mayapple, trilliums, and things starting to move in. Mulching is not something that honeysuckle typically rots very quickly. You can use the branches to make wildlife brush piles. That is good for native wildlife, you know, for protection and habitat. It can be mulched, I've seen, by some large-scale projects, but it's not something that we usually recommend to benefit the forest.
Gotcha. Well, in speaking of benefiting the forest, for our folks, it was Douglas out there. Would you suggest removing Norway maples? He had heard that they might shade out smaller oaks. Could you weigh in on this?
Well, Douglas, if you do have Norway maple is not native to Ohio. Okay, so if that's what you're looking at and it is in your woodlands, I personally would recommend removing Norway maple. It was introduced, it has become problematic and invasive in some states. I don't see it a lot in Southwest Ohio, escaped into the woods, but native white oak, red oak, all of our native oaks do require at some point, in the young early stages, they'll tolerate some level of shade, but they prefer sun. So there's some places where removing your maple may help, whether it's sugar maple in the west or red maple in Appalachian Hill Country, that could help if germinate young oak seedlings if you have overstory oaks already. And that's where I would strongly encourage you to get some guidance from a state service forester. If you have woods and you do have a high concentration of maple, to know exactly, if it's possible as a management option to grow oaks in your woodlands.
Thank you, Justin. So there were an influx of last-minute questions, and I will just hit on them really quickly. So the very first one was about what kind of resources do we use? Is there any like top-notch one we always go to? And I really recommend you guys going to that OhioDNR YouTube page, because in the very first part, we did cover some different resources to use. And specifically, I think the one that's been easiest for folks for wildflower viewing is, I prefer the Newcomb's Wildflower Guide. That's NEWCOMB, Newcomb's Wildflower Guide. It's a really great one. It's got excellent resources in the beginning to help kind of break down exactly how the book works. So really, even a beginner can use that resource. The other big one is we mentioned lesser celandine in the beginning of our webinar as an invasive that has come in, and they asked, is it too late to spray? Unfortunately, it probably is. So if you're going to be spraying herbicide on something, you really want to get it when it's a little bit sooner. You know, it's only 50% flowering, and you really want to be careful of the vegetation around it. If there's other flowers in that area, you don't want to impact those as well. So there is some hope, though. It can be dug out. It is a little bit difficult to do so, but it is something that you might want to catch now before it becomes too big of a problem. And absolutely 100%, thank you all for the phenomenal outreach of folks who want to volunteer for all of us. Volunteering is very important to every single one of our divisions. Please go to OhioDNR.gov. We've got the link to talk to your specific preserve managers in there. But if you've got a state park that's near you, preserve that's near you, forest that's near you, there's all sorts of different opportunities for you guys to reach out, to get involved, and to help these beautiful, beautiful natural resources we have here in Ohio. So I thank you to all of my team members today, and I thank all of you guys for watching. Let's finish celebrating April as our Native Plant Month strong this year. Get out and enjoy, guys.